Hi everyone, and welcome to the Napanee Water Pollution Control Plant Expansion and Upgrades Class Environmental Assessment Addendum Virtual Public Information Center, hosted by the Town of Greater Napanee. My name is Jonathan Rudick, and I work for R.V. Anderson Associates Limited, an engineering consulting firm that is assisting the town in completing the addendum process. I will be narrating today's presentation. This video was uploaded to the town's website and to YouTube on April 20th, 2021. Before we dive into this presentation, some housekeeping notes. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this Public Information Center, or PIC, has been recorded and posted on the Town of Greater Napanee's website and YouTube. No in-person event will be held. To help facilitate this virtual information center, please review the project materials, which include this presentation, and the frequently asked questions, or FAQs. This information can be found at the town website with the URL shown. If you have any questions or comments, please submit them by mail or email to either Todd Harvey or Valera Seknenko by May 7th, 2021. The Town of Greater Napanee welcomes you to this virtual PIC. The purpose of this presentation is to present and seek feedback on the proposed expansion of the Napanee Water Pollution Control Plant, or WPCP. The goals of this presentation are: provide background information on the Napanee WPCP and overview of the study. Present the problem and opportunity statement. List the treatment alternatives under consideration. Provide the evaluation criteria for assessing the treatment alternatives. Selection and presentation of the preferred alternative and the next steps for the Class EA addendum. And finally, answer any questions you may have and provide an opportunity to get involved in the project. To better explain the background of this project, we can answer three questions. 1. What are we doing? 2. Why are we doing it? And 3. What does it mean to you? To answer the first question, the Town of Greater Napanee is undertaking a Municipal Class Environmental Assessment, or Class EA, addendum. The objective of this project will be to evaluate treatment alternatives for the upgrades and expansion of the Napanee WPCP. To answer the second question, the town is seeking to replace aging equipment, eliminate bypassing, provide a reliable treatment alternative, and address community growth at the Napanee WPCP. It should be noted that replacing aging equipment also provides future savings in energy and maintenance costs. And finally, to answer the third question, these upgrades and expansion will require a new facility for the preferred treatment alternative. It is expected that the new facility will occupy vacant lands immediately adjacent to the existing Napanee WPCP owned by the town. Before proceeding further with the presentation, it may be helpful to have some definitions of the Class EA and addendum planning processes. The Class EA is a planning process followed by municipalities in Ontario when planning for new infrastructure, which allows for public, technical agencies, and Indigenous community consultation and input. The Class EA and appeals process is provincially regulated and is overseen by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, or the MECP. A Class EA addendum is a process to revise or update a Class EA to reflect changing regulations, standards, or to include new technologies for consideration. The timeline of previous studies for the Napanee WPCP is as follows. In 2011, a Schedule C Class EA was completed, which outlined the need for a new WPCP expansion to the existing plant. In 2019, a Class EA addendum was completed, which finalized the treatment technologies that the newly expanded WPCP would include. This brings us to the current Class EA addendum process, which is being used to revise the previously considered treatment technologies that the expanded WPCP would include. The Class EA addendum process follows these phases. Phase 1. Identify the problem and/or opportunity. Phase 2. Develop and evaluate alternatives and identify the preferred alternative. Note that we are currently at this phase of the process. Phase 3. Prepare a Class EA addendum report for public review. And Phase 4. Implementation of the Class EA and addendum findings, or design and construction of the new facilities. The Napanee WPCP is located at 300 Water Street in Napanee and treats wastewater from the Town of Greater Napanee in the County of Lennox and Addington. The current average rated capacity of the plant is 9,087 cubic meters per day. Below is a map which shows the property boundary of the WPCP and also shows the outlines of the areas of proposed infrastructure construction. In 2011, the town of Greater Napanee completed a Schedule C municipal class environmental assessment to study expansion from a rated capacity limit of 9,087 cubic meters per day to 11,500 cubic meters per day. As stated before, the expansion is required to replace aging equipment, mitigate environmental impact, and address community growth. A summary of the findings of the studies was a new plant on or adjacent to the existing site with increased headworks capacity, increased primary clarification capacity, increased secondary treatment process capacity by retrofitting the existing conventional activated sludge, or CAS, with one of the following alternatives: an expansion of the existing CAS, new true moving bed bioreactor, or MBBR system, a new integrated film activated sludge, or IFAS system, a new membrane bioreactor, or MBR system, tertiary treatment systems in the form of filtration, and a new UV disinfection system. It should be noted that the 4 secondary treatment alternatives were evaluated, but the final selection was to be confirmed prior to design, and this is the subject of the 2019 Class EA Addendum. In 2019, the town of Greater Napanee initiated a Class EA Addendum to finalize the treatment alternative selection described in the 2011 Class EA. To determine the secondary treatment alternative, the 3 alternatives reviewed were a new true moving bed bioreactor, or MBBR system, a new integrated fixed activated sludge, or IFAS system, and a new membrane bioreactor, or MBR system. From this review, the preferred treatment alternative was the new IFAS system. In 2020, RVA proposed another secondary treatment alternative to the town that may well be better suited for this new facility than the IFAS alternative. This alternative is called the Integrated Surge Anoxic Mix Sequencing Batch Reactor, or ISAM-SBR. The Class EA in 2011 and Class EA Addendum in 2019 project objectives were reviewed, and the current Class EA Addendum Problem and Opportunity Statement was updated as follows. The existing Napanee WPCP requires upgrades and additional sewage treatment capacity to meet the future needs of the town of Greater Napanee. To address those needs, this Class EA Addendum will review and confirm that the preferred alternative will 1. Meet the growth-related needs of the town of Greater Napanee by increasing the sewage treatment capacity of the Napanee WPCP. 2. Address regular secondary treatment system bypasses, insufficient treatment unit detention times, lack of redundancy, and the aging condition of the WPCP by upgrading the facility and implementing advanced treatment technologies. 3. Implement financially responsible treatment technologies. 4. Respect the limited assimilative capacity and sensitivity of the receiving Napanee River by enhancing effluent quality to meet current provincial guidelines and the Bay of Quinte Remedial Action Plan, or BQRAP, and maintain compliance with the Ontario Water Resource Act and the Environmental Protection Act. With the problem and opportunity statements summarized, we can now discuss each of the 4 alternatives for secondary treatment in greater detail. The MBBR uses plastic carrier media on which biofilm can grow in the aeration and anoxic tanks. The plastic carriers are retained in these tank sections. No return activated sludge, or RAS stream, is used. Existing plant infrastructure is modified and expanded. The advantages of the MBBR are the alternative can treat the required flows and loadings, and the treatment facility will be resilient to extreme weather events. The disadvantages of the MBBR are the alternative requires a standalone primary treatment process and intermediate pumping station. New aeration tankage is required. More intensive solids removal downstream of the process is required. Tertiary treatment is required, and significant modifications to existing assets are required to implement the process, leading to greater constructability risks and complexity. The estimated comparative life cycle cost of this alternative is $43 million. It should be noted, however, that the life cycle cost is for comparative purposes only and represents the 20-year life cycle cost of the specific alternative. The IFAS system uses plastic carrier media on which biofilm can grow in the aeration and anoxic tanks. The plastic carriers are retained in these tank sections. The difference between this alternative and alternative 1 is that a return activated sludge or RAS stream is required. Existing plant infrastructure is modified and expanded. The advantages of the IFAS are: the treatment system can handle variable loadings due to the biofilm in the system, and the RAS system allows for a smaller aeration tank footprint compared to alternative 1. The disadvantages of the IFAS are: the alternative requires a standalone primary treatment process and intermediate pumping station. New aeration and settling tankage is required, tertiary treatment is required, and significant modifications to existing assets are required to implement the process, leading to greater constructability risks and complexity. The estimated comparative life cycle cost of this alternative is $38 million. As with alternative 1, it should be noted that the life cycle cost is for comparative purposes only and represents the 20-year life cycle cost of the specific alternative. The MBR uses submerged membrane filters to complete secondary and tertiary treatment. The effluent is drawn through the membranes using permeate pumps. The advantages of the MBR are: this alternative requires the least amount of modifications to the existing system. The MBR offers the smallest footprint, with no need to expand the aeration or secondary tanks, and the MBR acts as both secondary and tertiary treatment processes. The disadvantages of the MBR are: this alternative requires a standalone primary treatment process, intermediate pumping station, and a fine screens filtration process. It has high energy consumption for the supporting systems. It has the highest operations and maintenance costs related to high energy use, specialty chemical use, and membrane replacement, and it has increased operational and construction complexity. The estimated comparative life cycle cost of this alternative is $46 million. As with the previous alternatives, it should be noted that the life cycle cost is for comparative purposes only and represents the 20-year life cycle cost of the specific alternative. The ISAM-SBR is a 3-celled contiguous tank. The first cell is a covered anaerobic basin or ISAM tank. The second cell is a surge anoxic mixing or SAM basin, and the third cell is the sequencing batch reactor or SBR. These 3 cells complete primary and secondary treatment for the process. The advantages of the ISAM-SBR are: primary treatment, intermediate pumping, secondary treatment, secondary clarification, and sludge thickening are consolidated into one process. Construction of a completely new treatment facility frees up existing property for future expansion and reduces construction complexity, and it greatly reduces secondary bypasses compared to other alternatives. The disadvantages of the ISAM-SBR are: greater complexity of operation and control of downstream treatment systems due to cyclic discharge of effluent. The estimated comparative life cycle cost of this alternative is $36 million. As with the previous alternatives, it should be noted that the life cycle cost is for comparative purposes only and represents the 20-year life cycle cost of the specific alternative. With the 4 secondary treatment alternatives summarized, we can now move on to how we will be evaluating these alternatives against each other. The treatment alternatives will be evaluated according to the criteria shown below, with each of the 4 categories being considered equally. The highest total score will identify the preferred alternative. The technical criteria are: implementation, feasibility, and constructability, process reliability and performance, flexibility, and process complexity and ease of maintenance. The financial criteria are: providing low life cycle costs over a 20-year period. The social criteria are: minimizes odor, noise, and traffic, minimizes disruption during construction, aligns with existing and future land uses, and protects archaeological and cultural heritage features. The natural environmental criteria are: climate change impact, terrestrial system impact, surface and groundwater impacts, and air quality impacts. The 4 treatment alternatives previously discussed were evaluated, and the results are summarized in the table below. The 4 treatment alternatives were scored based on the grading given in the legend below the summary table. The 4 scores an alternative could receive for each category are: not well aligned with criteria signified by a quarter full circle, somewhat well aligned with criteria signified by a half full circle, well aligned with criteria signified by a 3/4 full circle, and very well aligned with criteria signified by a full circle. For technical criteria, Alternative 1, the MBBR, is not well aligned. Alternative 2, the IFAS, is somewhat well aligned. Alternative 3, the MBR, is not well aligned. And Alternative 4, the ISAM-SBR, is very well aligned. Alternative 4 scored best in this category because of its operational simplicity and elimination of secondary and tertiary bypasses during design flows. For financial criteria, Alternative 1 is not well aligned. Alternative 2 is somewhat well aligned. Alternative 3 is not well aligned. And Alternative 4 is well aligned. Alternative 4 scored best in this category as it had the lowest life cycle cost and is the most energy efficient. For social and cultural criteria, Alternative 1 is somewhat well aligned, Alternative 2 is somewhat well aligned, Alternative 3 is somewhat well aligned, and Alternative 4 is very well aligned. Alternative 4 scored best in this category because it minimizes disruption to the existing plant operation. For natural environment criteria, Alternative 1 is somewhat well aligned, Alternative 2 is somewhat well aligned, Alternative 3 is somewhat well aligned, and Alternative 4 is well aligned. Alternative 4 scored best in this category because it does not disturb the aquifer on the existing plant site. In summary, therefore, Alternative 1 is not well aligned, Alternative 2 is somewhat well aligned, Alternative 3 is not well aligned, and Alternative 4 is very well aligned. The Integrated Surge Anoxic Mix Sequencing Batch Reactor, or ISAM-SBR, had the best score in each of the 4 evaluation categories and is the preferred treatment approach. This option has the lowest life cycle cost, is successfully used for biological treatment at other wastewater treatment plants in Ontario, and will eliminate the need for regular secondary and tertiary bypassing at design flows. An architectural rendering of the new treatment plant, specifically the headworks, is shown in the picture below. As can be seen in this slide, the project team has already reviewed the background information, distributed a notice of commencement, developed and evaluated the treatment alternatives, and identified the preferred alternative. The next step is to complete the reporting phase of the Class EA addendum, which includes preparing a Class EA addendum report to document project information, the decision-making process, and update the Class EA. The Class EA addendum report will then be sent to the Town of Greater Napanee Council for approval to file the report for a 30-day review period for public comment. Thank you for viewing and listening to today's Public Information Center. If you have any further questions or comments regarding the PIC or the project, please contact either Todd Harvey, the Town Project Manager, or Valera Seknenko, the RVA Project Manager, via the contact information given on this slide. Please provide your comments by May 7, 2021. More information, including copies of project notices and PIC materials, like the transcript of the virtual presentation, can be found at the town website. Thanks, and goodbye.